Institution of Great Britain. This is an interesting and illustrious place to be meeting, where science, debate, innovation meet, and I think that the content of the pamphlet in part is around the role of science, technology and debate and so on. So it's a good venue to be meeting. We're not going to talk at you for very long. We're also not going to be very participative, because I think the best way of participating is actually mixing and networking. We're not going to have some sort of huge facilitated thing with everybody in the room, you'll be pleased to hear. So I'm going to hand over to Richard Wilson, who is the former director of Involve, and then I will come back and speak a little bit about the content of the pamphlet before Jeff Mulgan, who's our chair, will talk, and we'll be finished very, very quickly, I promise, so you can get back to the wine. So let me hand over to Richard.
Well, thanks very much, Simon, and great to see so many people who've been helping with Involve over the past 5, 6, 7 years, or however long it is that we've been trying to do this kind of stuff. And I don't think we've ever had an event like this in a place that's so illustrious. So Simon's clearly doing something absolutely right. And I remember the first time we had a reception when Jeff came to talk, and he said to me, "Richard, it's okay, but only because you're in startup." And I think the not so hidden message was, we must never do it this badly ever again. I'm not sure, to be honest, we succeeded in that. Never mind. I don't know how other people feel right now, but it certainly feels, I don't know if it's just the birth of a new government, but it certainly feels like involvement is very much in the air. I've just come from a meeting with Eric Pickles. I think he really liked the title of this the pamphlet, but I think he preferred if it was talking for change. I think he removed the A and it became sort of cheap participation and engagement. I think he'd really appreciate that a great deal. But the rhetoric is amazing. I mean, I don't know what, there are colleagues here from CLG, and I don't know if it's even beginning to disseminate down. But also speaking to the director, Irene, as well this afternoon, it does seem that there's some kind of huge cultural shift taking place. And it made me think, really, 5 years, pretty much 5 years ago, we had the first Involve workshop in London. At the end of the R&D process, I think some of you were there. And we involved about 2,000 people in that process. Dialogue by Designer here, they helped run for free the engagement process that we did as part of that exercise. And we came up through that process of sort of 4 key areas that we had to work on. One was around advocacy, improving the state of the debate. One was what works, and a favourite of Jeff's that we really need to sort of develop over the time in terms of participation. One was around sort of innovation, in terms of innovation of practice, and the last one was networking. And I think when we reflect back on what has worked, well, I don't think we can have all the credit down to Involve, but certainly over the last 5 years, the level and quality of debate around these issues has improved. I mean, it seems incredible. I don't know if it's just because I hold the participation tool in my hand, hammer, and so I always see participation nails in front of me, but it does seem at the moment that there's an awful lot being discussed out there. And so I think in terms of advocacy terms, we've done pretty well. I think in terms of the networking stuff, to be honest, it's been quite hard. I don't know what other people would say. I think the field has changed a great deal. I think that it's been so dynamic that it's been quite hard to network things properly. But then if you look at the innovation, be it driven by technology or by techniques, I mean, clearly there's been a very, very high level of innovation, in which Involve has had a sort of key role to play. And then if we look at what works, the understanding areas, I was reflecting on sort of 3 areas, I think, that Involve made a really incisive contribution. If you look at Citizen Summits, which came over with OLR from America Speaks, we were involved in that transition, bringing it over to the UK, and we assessed it, working with the National Consumer Council and Ed Mayo, and we saw there were benefits in terms of the conversation, in terms of the opportunity for power holders to understand changing public opinion. We understood there were limitations. The benefits didn't always leave the room. They were very expensive. If you look at the empowerment agenda, we had very obviously a key role in that, meeting ministers, permanent secretaries down, and thinking through this empowerment gap that emerged in the UK over the last 10 years. And then finally, which is clearly a core pillar of this publication, the international work that has been central to Involve. I think really makes us stand out, and I know that Simon's been really driving forward that agenda, and not least last year working with the UNDP on COP15. There was really no other organisation working with the Danish government, the IPCC, trying to think through that stuff. It didn't work, but we tried, and that's got to be a core message of what we're trying to do at Involve. And I think these things sort of coalesce into, so where are we right now? And I think that the financial crisis that we're facing offers us sort of two core challenges and opportunities. I think the first one, relevant to many of us in this room today, is the one around practice. It is going to change our practice. It's going to have to. The costs are going to be less. We're going to have to do things more cheaply, but maybe we're going to do things in a more interactive way, in a way which actually provides platforms for people to get involved, as opposed to necessarily relies on us, the professionals, to always have to do it. Well, the other opportunity I see is the one around that we have right now, and I believe we have a window of opportunity between now and, say, September, October, to look at how we can begin to use the inevitable civic energy that will emerge as the big society gets taken forward. And I know it's something that Jeff's been talking to the guys about, and I had a long meeting with them earlier this week. And as I said to them, I think we're going to have a big society either, we're going to have a big society one way or the other. Either it's going to be against government, or it's going to be working with government, because the cuts are going to create a lot of energy, a lot of excitement, and probably a lot of anger. And I think that Involve is in a perfect position to be able to ensure that it's the latter, in the perfect position to ensure we channel this civic energy into rejuvenating our democracy, into rejuvenating our communities, and into building this big society that I know is at the core to what Involve is all about. So thanks, Simon, thanks, Involve, and thanks for everyone for coming along today. Thank you.
Richard, thank you for that. That was incisive and fascinating, and taking us in directions that are making us all think, which I think is what you always do. I should also thank you for handing me over such a fantastic organisation and doing it so graciously. I've taken over the helm of an organisation which really stimulates me every day I come into work, which is great. Richard has talked a little bit about the worldwide views process, which was bringing citizens together around COP15. And so 10 months ago, I found myself standing in an airless room in Kettering with 100 citizens drawn from the streets of Kettering to sit in this airless room for a day. And we, over the course of the day, were getting them to giving them information about climate change and getting them to deliberate about it. But we also connected them to Sydney, to 100 citizens in Sydney. We connected them to what our Deputy Director, Edward Anderson, calls the Kettering of Finland. I'm not quite sure what the Kettering of Finland is, but we connected the citizens of Kettering to it. And then, at the end of the day, to California, just as the Californian citizens were about to start their deliberation. It truly was an astounding process involving 38 countries, 4,400 people, deliberating on what government was going to be talking about in December in Copenhagen, and trying to understand what they thought government should be doing at the negotiations. It was truly transformative for those who took part. People came into the room unsure if they could contribute, and really engaged. And some of them we struggled to get out of the room at the end, and for good reasons, not bad. And it was groundbreaking. Nobody had ever tried a dialogue like this across the globe. And Worldwide Views built on developments in public engagement over the last 10 years or so, and it demonstrated that we are getting better at public engagement in different circumstances. And at the heart of the pamphlet which we're launching tonight is we've developed a typology of different kinds of issues, trying to understand what issues face society and how those relate to how you might engage citizens in them. And what we do is we identify climate change as a totally different class of issue, alongside a small number of others, such as ageing society. Many of you will have seen Lovelock interviewed in The Guardian probably a month and a half ago now, where he said he fears that human beings are too stupid and we may have to put democracy on hold to deal with climate change. That's one vision of where we might go, but this pamphlet offers a different vision. This pamphlet offers a vision where, instead of saying that we need to be led from the front and need to be told what to do and have a government telling us what to do and where to invest, and that we must stop using our cars and so on, that actually you can engage citizens in an adult conversation about the choices that face us, and you can move it forward. And the issue of climate change and ageing society and so on, we identify as being different. And they're different in category from things like problems facing technology and how technology might affect society, because it requires action. Ageing society also requires us to look after our granny. It requires us to think about elderly care and so on. But it also requires action at multiple levels. We need people to take the action at the local level, community level, as well as action at national and international level. And government clearly can't solve it alone. Government can't impose things alone. And so we reflected on this process in Kettering, where we had 100 people in the room who really engaged with the issue of climate change, some quite challenging information for many of them. And 100 citizens can provide invaluable insights to government around how citizens might react if they had more information and what their policy choices might be. But I was at a workshop last week, or running a workshop last week, and I wanted to kind of illustrate how small 100 people are. So I drew a pie chart of the 58 million people that live in the UK, and I put the 100 people into the pie chart. And I'm a scientist, I knew it was going to be small, but actually, of course, you couldn't see them at all, because 100 people compared to our population is tiny. And I suddenly realised that when you're thinking about getting action, and thinking about wanting people to really engage and take action and identify problems themselves, doing these small-scale dialogues is really the homeopathic theory of public engagement. We're diluting it so much that what is our mechanism of action? And so what this pamphlet then does is explores, well, how does dialogue need to change for some of this new class of issues? And I'm not going to tell you anything about the characteristics, partly because I've gone on too long, and partly because I want you to read the thing and not for me not to tell you. Doing dialogue at scale, democratising the way we have a conversation, at national or even global level, represents a huge challenge. Worldwide views. There are 12 different languages in Indonesia, for example, let alone the languages that all the materials have to be translated in across the world. Huge challenges about doing this at the national level, let alone the international level. And we know that it won't be easy, but we also know that engaging citizens in a truly adult conversation can have a profound impact and can help harness the energy of citizens, as the government is trying to do with the big society, and help them to identify their own problems and help them to identify how they're going to solve those problems together. And what I'm going to do before I hand over to Jeff is just briefly talk about a process that ran in Estonia in May 2009. 11,000 citizens met across Estonia in 400 venues. That's about 1% of the population. And they took part in the My Estonia conversation. These were events that were run by local voluntary groups using a common framework to identify what citizens thought the problems were that were facing them, their communities, and Estonia. 2,500 practical ideas were recorded. And what was absolutely fascinating about this was that the majority of them weren't things that government should be doing and spending money on. These were things that citizens working with the voluntary sector could begin to do on their own if only they could harness that energy and harness a common agenda. And this was inspired, this conversation was inspired by some work that happened in Estonia a short time before, where waste had been mapped across the country. And on a specific day, 50,000 citizens got together and cleared up the country. And somebody afterwards calculated that it would have taken the government 3 years and 22.5 million euros to do exactly the same thing that the citizens did in one day. It is possible to engage citizens if you engage them like adults, but if you treat them as if they are the passive recipients of what you have to say to them, you won't get that energy. So before I hand over to Jeff, just a couple of really important thank yous. Firstly to Omar, Emily and the staff that are involved for putting this on and for helping us to make sure that we can get this pamphlet out. Particularly like to thank Rupert and Sarah who have come and volunteered for us. They're not connected to Involve except personally, and they've come and they've volunteered and been working on the desk downstairs. Rupert in particular has exams on Monday, so we're very grateful to him. To Emily and Edward who wrote the pamphlet with me, but most of all to Joseph Rowntree Charitable Trust for both funding with the Toulouse Gulbenkian and City Bridge Trust the Worldwide Views process in the UK, but also Rowntree for funding the pamphlet, because without them this wouldn't have been possible at all. And thank you all for coming. So let me hand over briefly to Jeff.
Well, thanks, Simon. I've been chairing Involve since it began, and the good side of that, as you would have realised, is we've been very lucky to have two superb directors combining brains, passion, and the ability to get things done. The bad side is they've said everything that I was going to say, and I feel like the American senator who in a particularly interminable debate said, I know that everything which needed to be said has already been said, but not everyone has said it yet. So here's my very brief go. I think the starting point for Involve is in some ways a very, very simple idea, which is that in a modern democracy of adults, is not enough just to put a cross on a piece of paper, fun as that is. And if you don't have a more serious dialogue, engagement, actually the public won't buy into the decisions which are taken. And elections, even in the days when they delivered majorities, did not give you a full license, they gave you a conditional license. A license you in a way had to renew all the time you were in office. Now I think to a surprising degree, that's become a sort of conventional wisdom, perhaps because of expenses, crises of trust, and so on. But when Involve was launched, and I think still that now, the gap has been really translating that into action. What really works in engaging people? We have seen lots and lots of appalling consultation, cosmetic simulacrums of engagement of the public just to rubber stamp what's already been agreed, and sometimes ones which just backfire and leave people angry because people aren't stupid. And what I think Involve has done really successfully under Richard and Simon is through a whole series of projects being very rigorous and focused on how you do this well, what the difference is between good involvement and bad involvement, whether the issue is nanotechnology or budget setting in Jersey or big issues of health. As Simon said, and Richard, the language of the big society is potentially quite an opportunity. I don't think anyone can see that phrase, which most people still don't quite know what it means, but if it's to mean anything, it can't just be an observer society, passively watching on. And we can see the government trying to work out how to use the sorts of things Involve has been talking about, either to handle deep, troubling questions of deficit reduction, spending cuts, as well as many others like around climate change, which we can't avoid. Exactly how they do it is unclear as yet, but I think Involve is very well placed to play a key part in the answers. When Involve launched, in my mind, I imagined at the same time someone launching an organisation called Ignore. And it was going to be a sort of mirror of Involve, full of the skeptics and the cynics saying, don't bother with that stuff, you know, it's all a waste of time. And there have been times over the last 5 years when I thought maybe the share price of Ignore was going up and the share price of Involve was going down. At the moment, I think that's not the case. And I think even amidst a very difficult climate ahead, I think there's going to be a need for Involve, for the knowledge it's built up, for the techniques it's developed, and really for the wider community which it's part of. And I really pay tribute to all the staff within Involve, but actually there's a much wider network of people who've collaborated in trying to turn really the ideal, the aspiration of a truly engaged public, a truly engaged democracy into reality. And there's just one very last thing I'm going to do before letting you get back to the serious business of drinking, perhaps even browsing the shelves, and that is to give a gift really of thanks to Richard for having been really the founding spirit in Involve, for having been a true sort of social entrepreneur in creating it, building it up, infusing it with his energy, but even more doing the one thing which every founder really has to do and most fail to do, which is to hand it over in really good health and see it go even further from strength to strength. So I'd like to thank Richard and give him this little token of our appreciation. I encourage you all to come and have a closer look at what it is.
I'm not sure you want to know, you should. It's me, but it looks even better than reality. As hard as that. Thank you very much.
Thank you all very much, and look forward to catching up with you over the drinks.